This past summer, my fiance and I found ourselves staying in a small town in North Dakota. We were on a road trip to see family and friends out west. We started in Wisconsin, where I grew up, and eventually made it all the way to Denver and then back around. I didn't quite realize, though, when I made the hotel reservation a few months earlier, just how isolated that town in North Dakota actually was. It had only a few hundred people and was a good 45 minutes from anywhere else, even if you went 70 miles an hour. Driving there was an experience in minimalism. It was corn country, but not the endless flatness you might see other places. There were low rolling hills and small lakes, populated by flocks of geese and, surprisingly, pelicans. Occasionally we'd see a herd of cattle, little black specks on the horizon, that would grow into larger forms as you approached. Dirt roads diverged nicely and neatly in right angles, with signs that said 503rd Street, somewhere out of whatever town was nearest by. I found myself looking for signs of human life in that. Farmhouses, signs, corner taverns, and especially, perhaps predictably, churches. You could see the white steeples from far away, and most of these churches were unlocked, open for visitors, with little trimmed lawns surrounded by crops and maybe a cemetery. My grandfather had been a pastor at several of them in the area, and I tried to imagine how different it would have felt for him to be there, so different than being here in New York City for me. Despite the emptiness of places like that, you learn to recognize signs of civilization. A row or a cluster of trees means that a farmer probably planted them, either to protect crops or to shade a home, even if those crops and the home are no longer there. And when you scan the horizon looking for wherever you're going, that small town, you look for a water tower or a grain elevator called the skyscrapers of the prairie, which will give you a clue of where people are. When we finally arrived in that small town, it was obvious that there was a storm coming. We found our hotel. It was the kind of place where they simply left the door open to you in the parking lot, come in, and the key was on the bed. It was about 7:30 at night, and we realized that we hadn't eaten in hours. There were no restaurants in the small towns and roads we'd crossed before. So we needed dinner. There was a main street to explore, which made us optimistic. It was small, though, without stoplights or even stop signs, and definitely had seen better days. But we looked at Yelp, and there was reception there. And there were a few restaurants that were highly, if minimally, reviewed. I volunteered to explore for the both of us and set out to see what options there were. It became immediately apparent that we had a problem. Walking down this main street, the first place I stopped was a bar and grill, nestled in a columned bank building that looked like it was from 150 years ago. It was locked with dusty windows and a hollowed-out sign that suggested it had been closed a long time ago. I stopped next at the diner, hopeful it was one of those late-night ones, but it was clearly out of business as well. There was another place that did seem to still be functioning. They said they were open, but they weren't. And then there was a small grocery store that closed at 5 o'clock. I had clearly gone spoiled, living here in the land of seamless and 24-hour takeout. I started to worry that there might be literally no place within 45 minutes of us to get any kind of food. In semi-desperation, I realized that there were gas stations that I could visit, a mobile station at the edge of town, right across from a park which had an old army tank and a propped-up helicopter to mark the wars. I looked around this gas station, and there wasn't much. Outside of snacks and candy bars, The only thing that I found we could eat were cans of Campbell's, cream of celery, and mushroom, which someone told me wasn't a real soup, and it was actually just ingredients that you mix with other things. I didn't know that at the time. I found some plastic spoons after some digging around and left hoping that our hotel room had a microwave. I texted my fiance to apologize in advance that this would not be a 5-star meal. I was not a very good gatherer. As I left, it even began to rain, lightly at first and then downpouring. I felt somewhat pitiable, me making my way down a hungry and drenched, slogging down a barren street. I realized as I was walking back, there was one final gas station to explore. It looked so small and dingy that I had passed it up. It never would have occurred to me to stop there when I first started, but I was desperate, so I ducked inside. It was much larger than I expected. There were tables, and there were chairs, and there was even a sign that said they made pizza. I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. I approached the man at the counter and asked what they had. His name was Randy. Unfortunately, Randy told me they were about to close. He must have seen me get very dejected at that moment and suggested that there might be a frozen pizza in the back that he could warm up for us. When I went to investigate and saw that there were no frozen pizzas back there, I reported back, and he was still sympathetic. It's okay, he said. He could just make a cheese pizza himself. They don't usually take all that long. He felt like my savior in that moment. It took him almost 30 minutes beyond closing to make that pizza. And if he must have expected it, because he does this for a living. As he cooked, we got to talking. I learned that he was a former Air Force engineer and had lived all over the world, far from my stereotype of someone living in a place like that. He had lived in England, Korea, and India. He gave off this sturdy working class vibe, thick mustache, a black veteran's hat. He and his wife had retired to North Dakota because his own parents had moved there a few years ago. He'd gotten antsy and bought the gas station and store and thought it would be a good way to meet people and get to know the town. I was surprised by his openness and warmth, his willingness just to hang out with me. He seemed to convey no urgency or inconvenience as he worked late. I started to learn why as we talked. Shortly after he and his wife moved there, his parents left and moved to Arizona. By that point, Randy had already owned the store and bought a home, and as he explained it, they were stuck in a place they had absolutely no reason to be in, cut off from the world, completely isolated. It clearly bothered Randy, not just because of how his parents left, but because how different his life was than what he thought it was going to be. Not only was he vastly geographically isolated, but he was socially isolated as well. In that town, people knew each other for years because they grew up together. Their families knew each other and had known each other for generations. But Randy and his wife, they were outsiders. They were different. And the one place they might have gone for community, he said, was the church. But he and his wife were atheists, which in the minds of those in the town just reinforced that they were suspicious. They were not like them, and they didn't belong. They treat us like crap, he said. I listened to several examples of how people have been rude and dismissive and judgmental, even when they're in his store. And I felt a great deal of sympathy for Randy in that moment. Ever since that evening, it became hard to forget him. I think back to him still standing at that counter today, each day, feeling isolated surrounded by those vast fields of corn and quiet and people, wishing he was somewhere else, instead of with folks who didn't care to understand him or appreciate him for who he was, through no fault of his own. I couldn't help thinking what it would have been like if it were me, stuck in a lonely place with no one to talk to. I was glad to leave the next morning, full of his good pizza from the night before, but I was sorry to leave Randy behind. My sympathy for him doesn't come from a place of pity, but of resonance. For some, like many of those in the small town, home is natural and easy. We know what it is. It's where we are born, where our family comes from, where we grow up, and where we live. It's embraced gladly and easily. But for many of us, maybe most of us, it's hard to find a place that feels like home. We define home as where we live and feel most comfortable, where our heart is, where we feel safe and whole. Then, like Randy, a lot of us feel ourselves adrift and apart. I think this is especially true in places like New York City. This is a place of extremes, transience, a city full of people who are from other places. Some of us moved to get away from where we were from, places like that town in North Dakota. Or we came looking for opportunities or freedom we couldn't have anywhere else. Lots of people come for a little while and then leave, making it hard to feel settled for the rest of us. We do stay, or even if we are ourselves just passing through. I even observe it here in this congregation. I've been with you for 2 years, and we have lost so many folks to just moving away. The congregation feels differently because of it. There are different people here. It's hard to feel settled in a place like that. Being able to consider making New York City a home is, of course, a privilege. Lots of folks would love to be here. It's a place full of wonder and history and energy. There's no place like it, but making a home here can be really hard. Someone here told me once, human beings weren't designed or evolved to live in a place like this. It's not our mental makeup. It can be lonely. You don't need to be in a place like North Dakota to feel that. Psychologists have talked about how it feels worse to be lonely in a place full of lots of people than it is to feel lonely actually being isolated. The city can be disorienting and disheartening. The sheer painfulness of the subway, the potent smell of trash day, the overwhelming struggle to find a literal home in this city that is so unaffordable. And it's a place full of ambitious people. It creates anxiety about status and career that leads us to feeling inadequate, like maybe we don't really belong with all these other people. I like the word homecoming. It has sweet, cozy connotations. And I think that's part of why we use it to celebrate our homecoming here at Fourth Universalist, our homecoming Sunday. But the word also implies passivity. Like all we have to do is show up, and we have fulfilled our homecoming ritual. I like the term homemaking better. It's more active, and I think it's more real to what we have to do here. Homemaking is the act of making a home, having to work to feel at home, to find a sense of inner peace within ourselves, a sense of wholeness. It's not simply finding a physical space in the world where you want to live. It can be that, but it's also much more and much deeper. To make a true home, we have to know what we long for. We have to know ourselves, what we need, what we want, what we hope for. We have to be able to take that wherever we go to make it. There are many ways we can do that, even when we are struggling with our sense of place. For Randy, alone and isolated, back in his gas station, homemaking was trying to offer a kindness to a drenched and hungry stranger, and not letting an opportunity of genuine connection pass him by. He took it to feel a little less alone. His physical home and the people that may have rejected him gave him the courage to make that evening a little less painful for him. It's different for all of us, though. Maybe for you, homecoming is engaging in a regular act of service, connecting with your values, volunteering at a place like this congregation, connecting with folks who believe like you do. Or maybe it would be returning to a yoga practice that you used to do that makes you feel whole. It could be scheduling a weekly Skype conference with family and friends who live so far away, but who reconnect you with your sense of feeling loved. It could even be sitting on your fire escape every night before bed, listening to music, drinking a beer, because that's what gives you peace. We can't control always where our home is. Small town or big city, a place we love or a place we loathe. And especially now as our world struggles with fear and hate and delusion and feels so hostile towards us, even our own country. We feel unsafe and unsettled, like we don't really know the ground that we walk on anymore. But where I think the hope is that we have this power to make the home in ourselves. We can look to our values, to our goals, to our loves, our peace, and our community. And if we know what those things are, we can start doubling down. We can start bringing those to life in small ways that we can. And then we can start shaping the world around us to be more like them, more like those things. It doesn't matter where we are if we can make that effort. We are lucky here at least, because no matter where we're from or what our home feels like right now in this place, we at least have each other. Home is about relationships. It's about knowing who we are. And we don't have to be alone if we don't want to here. Not everyone, like my friend in North Dakota, has that comfort or that option. I know many of us call forth Universalist home. And I don't think you mean only physical space. It's where we come together every week, but it's also where we foster this inner sense of our own place, our own home, through the people, the ministry, the depth, the inner reflection, and where we're inspired to go out into the world and make it more like that home we want to see. Coming back to you over the summer, I am grateful to be back home with you here. This is my home too. I am glad that it is your home. And together, we can make this place home not just more for each other, for those who need it in this hurting world, this hurting city, this lonely city. We can make sure that it is the place that we want to live. May we do it for ourselves and for others, for everyone.